For some of you who are here for the first time, my name's Cindy Briggs, and I'm really excited to have you here. This is a free paint along, and there's nothing like seeing whatever you paint as we share at the end of this session. I'm going to take a big group picture. I have some of my students from yesterday that have shared in our Facebook groups, and they're beautiful paintings, every single one of them. So I have complete confidence that this will be fun and easy and doable. And always remember that any painting that you do, just think of it as a study. And sometimes the first time it magically turns out, and sometimes we just have to try it a few times to get into the swing of it. So there's no pressure at all, and you can just sit and watch if you want. Part of the reason I'm doing this also is to talk a little bit about my About Watercolors online program, and I'll just talk about it a little bit as I'm painting, and I just appreciate you for being here and spending your time with me. This handout was in the newsletter as a PDF that you could download, and I'll have it kind of on the screen too so that you can see what I'm doing. Let's do a little bit of warm-up, and I'll talk about the colors that I'm using. Now I use the Dynasty Black Gold 311 brush. This is a size 4. I like getting different sizes. You know, I always say if you can get the one, great, you can paint almost anything. But if you want to, when you're ordering them from the brush guys, I'd get a few of them. They're not very expensive. I think this one's about $6, and the big one runs about $14 through them, and then the others are in between. But this is a 4, a 2, a 0, and a 00. So these are just amazing brushes. I've been using this main one for about 10 years. I have 50 of them. So when I teach, I'm always bringing extras because I want people to know if you have a good brush, it's so much easier to paint. And like I said, they're inexpensive. Now, an important tip that I always give is when you put your brush in the water, you want to tap off the extra water. So sometimes you hear me doing this, so I'm tapping off the water or I'm dragging it off the edge. And then you don't have too much water in your brush. So what I'm going to do is just show you some of the colors I'm using. This is cobalt blue, and it's kind of a milky mix. And notice when I paint, if I have a big area, I use the side of my brush. Now, if I add water to it, that is more of a coffee consistency. It's a little more watered down, and it's lighter. Now, if you end up with a big puddle, just squeeze your brush with a dry paper towel, and you can pick up the puddle without dabbing it. As soon as you start dabbing with a paper towel or a tissue, you make your painting a little mottled. And so I avoid that. Now, herbal tea is very light. And so this is my very light wash. If you can paint these 3 values, you're doing really well. Here you can hardly see it. But sometimes that's just what you need is a very subtle wash. And that's just cobalt blue. Now, if you want to go darker, and I do this a lot in my classes, I barely have any water in my brush, and this is very creamy, and I can go much darker. So I'll be using a lot of these different values in my painting. Another color that I love is lavender. Lavender is great for shadows, and you can almost see it in the background of this painting, of this photograph. So lavender is probably one of the most key colors on my palette. Now, something you may notice is once I put the color down, I don't go back into it. The fewer brush strokes you can use, the better. People think, oh, if I keep painting on it, it will get better. And it actually gets worse. So always think, get in and get out. Another color that I'm using today is lemon yellow. Now, lemon yellow is not something I use a lot of. I have 4 warm yellows on my palette. But lemon yellow is a great mixer. It's one of my triad colors. If you get my list with the color wheel, you'll see I use lemon yellow, rose, and phthalo blue. So lemon yellow is a very transparent color and it mixes well. So let's see, if I mix it with blue, I get a wonderful green. This gives me some other options for my greens. If I mix it with green apatite, here's green apatite, and that's my basic green. It's a very earthy green, and I use it a lot. So let's add some lemon yellow to that. Here we go. There's a nice kind of lemony green. There, so look at all the colors. I've got 4 colors here that I've used, and I've got all this range of value. Now, I mentioned ultramarine blue, which looks a lot like cobalt. So you can usually go one way or the other. The thing about ultramarine is that it's a classic color. It's part of the Velasquez palette. And sometimes I just want to use it. It's more transparent than cobalt. Now I've got one more spot here, and this is optional for you because I didn't mention it in the list. But if you have rose and you want to mix a little bit of purple or violet into your painting, you can use that rose with one of your blues and get a beautiful violet. There we go. So we've got a nice range of colors, and that'll be fun to include in our painting today. So my paint-alongs are different from my workshops. My workshops, I'm more in depth, and we spend a lot of time on a specific subject in a workshop where we're focusing on completing a finished painting. In a paint-along, they tend to be simpler. We've done a whole range of things. And, I've got Paint Tuscany and Watercolors by the Sea, Quick Sketch. I even did a portrait in a paint-along. So it can vary, but this is a very simple paint-along. And since I have multiple Bluebonnets in here, I thought, well, I can just add to this, and you can watch me develop this painting. Take it a little further. You can just paint one, or you can paint more than one. It's up to you. So I'm going to show you how I draw a quick sketch, and I usually use a Faber-Castell Artist Pip pen that is a permanent fine marker. I bought these off Amazon, and I think for $20, and I got all these pens, and they're actually working really well for me. The Faber-Castell you can usually pick up at the art store. So I always mention that, but I'm mentioning his too because I'm kind of excited about these microline pens. And I tend to use the fine, there's quite a few fine points, but now and then you do want a thicker line, and that they give you a great variety. This is a 0.03, so it's pretty fine. Now, if you're putting more than one Bluebonnet on your painting, you want them to have different heights. That keeps it much more interesting. And the Bluebonnets, I just was in Texas, so that's what I'm excited about right now. Now, something that's very important when drawing just about anything, you look at the outside shape. Don't get involved in all the details. just focus on the perimeter. So, if I'm painting a sunflower, I tend to do the same kind of thing. That's what I'm looking at. And it makes it so much easier to draw. And I also tend to keep my pen down, and that gives it an organic feel. This has a big white square in the middle, so I'm going to go with that. And then we've got more petals coming out here. Now you'd be surprised if you haven't done this before. It actually goes pretty well. And I'm going to put some leaves down in here. Once again, I'm focusing on the outside shape. Thank you for reading my newsletters. I know you must if you're here, so I appreciate that. It's a labor of love to get those out. And to so many of you have taken my workshops, I really appreciate you. I get so much energy from my students as you share your journey and what you're going through as you create your paintings. Oh, I see, I'm kind of out here a little ways. Now you can make a mistake or maybe forget a petal. It's fine, it doesn't matter. Something like this is so organic that as long as you're close, it'll say Bluebonnet. And that's true with most subjects that I teach. I'm always talking about, don't worry about getting it like the photo, as long as it gives you the essence of that, it's wonderful. So I've got some interesting leaves down at the bottom. I'm going to go ahead and draw one more. And those are here, so I'll pull this one down, even though it's the tallest. As the artist, you get to design your painting. And I think I'm going to have this one cross over so they're touching. Yeah, these bluebonnets were just starting to show up when we arrived in Texas earlier in April. And I was so excited. I've got my first painting lesson that I'm doing in All About Watercolors is of the cottage that we stayed in. And the bluebonnets were just starting to show. And you see a petal and add it in. Like I said, these are all different, so you really can't go wrong. Now, the bluebonnets are a special kind of lupine. Somebody mentioned that. I looked up lupine before I went to Texas, so I know, well, are they lupine or are they, what do you call them? And in Texas, they call them bluebonnets. It's a certain kind that grows in Texas. And they're so proud of their bluebonnet season. It just is like God has taken a paintbrush and added color to all the fields. They're growing on the side of the road, people's yards. They're just gorgeous. Maybe a field of lupine near Bend, Oregon, when I lived there, because I remember painting a doggy portrait and it was surrounded by lupine. Okay, so now I've got 3 different heights, and I think that's kind of interesting. I'm going to show you how to put in a background too, so it's not just going to be white. Now, once you've got the outside finished, you can come in and draw some of the inside shapes. And it's almost better, in fact, it is better, not to try to draw from my picture, but to just draw what you see, however it turns out, and enjoy the process. And then when you're finished, if you're in one of my groups, or what is it, Cindy Briggs Art, my Facebook page, you can share your painting in there. I could add a little more detail on that. Those white spots on some of the flowers, I think, are really beautiful. So I want to make sure I don't forget those. And with white, you just want to save the white rather than paint it in with watercolor. So I'll show you how to do that when we get to that point. So right now I'm just using my pen to go ahead and put in all of these petals. Now, why do I use a pen? I find for a quick sketch study, it's just really easy to put the line in and then accept it. Whereas as soon as you start drawing with a pencil, you might start erasing. So it really hones in your drawing skills to use a pen. I don't use a pen with all my paintings, just studies. And I also found with my painting demos that you can really see my drawing if I use a pen. So hopefully you've got something on your paper, even just one is great. You can fuss a little bit with it and draw in a few more petals down in, but I think that's just about right. This one, I'll save a little white. It's kind of good for me to draw it out twice. And we'll start painting. Okay, I'm actually going to grab my 2. It's got a little better point on it right now. I've abused that other one. And I like to have a dry paper towel nearby. And I've got my picture right here so you can see it. I may move it as I go, but this will help you see. Now, the first thing I do, notice I have 2 water buckets. That's just so I don't, if I get really green, ugly water, I may want to have fresh for my yellows to keep it nice and pure. And I collect these pictures when I travel, so it's really fun to use them to paint with. Now, once again, remember, see how I'm dragging my brush across the top. And I want to start with some yellow, fresh yellow. I got a little green in there. That happens every time. And I can just dab at it with a paper towel and it'll clean it up. So I've got my bright yellow and I just want to get that in first where I see some of the yellow. In my printout, it looks a little more like gold. It's going to turn out different on everybody's printer. So I'm using the bright yellow because that's what I remember seeing. And I've got a little bit of yellow. And I can start painting with my purples, lavender, and blue. Okay, French ultramarine or cobalt blue, whichever one you're excited about. And I'm being careful to stay out of the yellow so it doesn't lose its freshness. And I can just paint around those white shapes. Now, a very important thing to do is as you're painting your petals, vary the value and the color. And that will make it much more interesting than if you just have one value or one color. So just have fun changing your values up. You know, maybe you'll go really dark on a petal, and then around it, I might go lighter. Here's another petal that has a spot of white on it. If you want to go darker, remember it's more paint, less water. And lighter is more water, less paint. And that's how you can vary your values. My aunt, who's my mentor, she always said, change your color every inch. So I'm not measuring the inch. I'm just, every time I go into my palette, and I may paint 1 or 2 petals, then I change the color or I change the value. And it's just natural for me to do that as I'm painting. You know, if I get to something, oh, it's kind of the same value. So let's take this darker there. So now I've got a dark next to white. And I am loving that purple. Let's take advantage of that. Purple and yellow look really good together because they're complements. This one has quite a few more of the white spots. So I just have to think about it a little bit as I'm painting. These are white, so I'm leaving those white. These have the little white spots on them. You know, tucked in just a little bit of yellow. And I'm not trying to do a botanical painting where I get everything just right. I'm doing more of an impression of what I see. And I think they're wonderful models for us. They give us so many options to, kind of do our own thing. I see a little bit of yellow right here. Now you'll notice the more you paint something, the more you see what's there. And that's an exciting thing about being an artist, is that you get to see the world much more in depth than most people. You notice shapes, you notice details that, most people are missing. And, for instance, I remember taking pictures in Venice all morning. And then in the afternoon, I was taking pictures of the same things. And the person I was with, it's like, oh, you already took a picture of that. Well, in the afternoon, the light is completely different. And so it looks different to me. I can capture a whole different mood based on the time of day. I've got, remember we mixed a green with blue and yellow. So there's one green apatite right here. And you can take green apatite and add yellow to that and get another green. So now I've got 3 different greens, just like I had a variety of blues. And so I don't want to use just one green. I want to vary it, maybe bring down some of that yellow, green. I can even put a touch of blue in my stem. When you have surprises of color in your painting, it's much more interesting. So even just a little spot of color in there that's different can really make it fun. So All About Watercolors is my newest online program. And after creating, let's see, what have I done? Quick Sketch and Watercolors by the Sea and Paint Tuscany and Portraits and How to Mix Colors, which are wonderful programs that you just buy for a year and paint on your own schedule with paint-alongs, bonus paint-alongs now and then. See, what I'm doing is dropping in different colors as I do this. So I don't just have one green. I have a variety of greens plus the lavender in there as a surprise. I'm having so much fun varying these colors, just going back and forth and working my way across. So there's some interesting blending going on. And notice I don't go back into this. Once I paint through it, I leave it alone and let it dry. When it's shiny, you can keep going. But once it starts to get more of a dampness to it instead of shiny, you need to stay out of there. And so what I'm doing is getting that color in, that first layer of color, and then I will just leave it be. Here's more of a yellow green. In my program, I'm real excited because I can paint what I'm excited about. If you give me feedback, I can take it in different directions. So I'm not limited to anything. We can do Provence, Spanish, landscapes. We can go to Zion. I may take you to Tennessee. Where am I going? Oh, and I'm going to Mississippi. I'll be in California this year. I can actually paint my demonstrations while I'm traveling. My first lesson video, I'm almost ready for it. This is a cottage that I stayed in Texas. And here's those bluebonnets that are just popping up, which I love. So I waited until the light was just right so I could get some really nice light and shadow. And I've already drawn it out. It's going to have a lot more bluebonnets in the field, I think. And so I'm going to show you how to do a complete painting with the bluebonnets and a building and trees. Now, if you're a beginner, I'm also giving you just the house and maybe the colors of the bluebonnets. I want to have in every lesson an option for beginners and an option for more experienced painters. So this is what I'm starting with. And this will be posted in our paint-alongs section. Let's see, I'll go ahead and put some color on these. Why not? So if you missed it the first time around, or sometimes the hardest part of being an artist is deciding what to paint. As a plein air artist, I love the challenge of having 360 degrees of subject and deciding, well, what am I excited about? It might be the whole hilltop town, or it could be a flower pot and anything in between. And so my advice with that is just focus on what you're most excited about when you're traveling or trying to decide on what to paint and going through your photos. Now, just pick something simple to begin with, like one flower, and then work your way up to the field of flowers if that's what you're interested in. Ooh, I love painting these. It just takes me back to Texas. I have 3 of these, and I'll tell you, anytime I have more than one, I'm going to have a favorite, and the other 2 may not be as much my favorite, but the combination of the 3, I think is kind of fun. Now, another thing about my All About Watercolors is that I have a photo library in there. So you can just pick from the photos to paint from, because sometimes maybe you need a little inspiration, or where you are may not be as colorful and you're feeling like painting a colorful painting. I'm going to be adding more photos to that library. I think I've got about 15 in there already, and we're going to build from there. The Facebook groups are really fun. People share in the Facebook groups their paintings if they want, or just make comments. They're very supportive. Now, this is Rose of Ultramarine. I cheated. I went and grabbed some of that instead of my rose. What it is rose and ultramarine together. And I just love that as an easy purple. This one will have more purple on it. So now I've got 3 of the bluebonnets, and the colors in each one are a little different. That gives them some personality. And the shapes are all different. Something I'm always looking for is, how can I make these unique and have a few surprises now and then. All right, so we've got a variety of color and shapes. I would like to take just some creamy mix of my ultramarine blue and drop in a few darker darks on some of these petals. You don't have to fill it all in. Sometimes you see light and shadow on a petal. So I can just suggest a value change by dropping in or brushing in another layer of color. And just to make it easy, I'm just using a very creamy mix of my ultramarine blue. That just starts to give you layers and makes the painting look more dimensional. And most beginners, when you start, that's the challenge, is how to keep it from looking so flat, but actually giving your painting more dimension. And it's all about values. I'm going to put in a diffused wet and wet background. And that is optional. You could leave it white, you could splatter on it, or we can add some color in the background, kind of like we have in the photograph. It's lower green, and then we've got the purples and blue, and then it gets lighter up above. And so that's the look I'm going for. So what I'll have to do is put some water in the open spaces and work with the colors I've already got in there. I can come back later. I may do a little more with those, but I'm just going to leave it as it is. When you're going to cover a large area, it helps to pre-mix some paints. So I've got, there's my green, here's and cobalt blue, here's some ultramarine blue, and I'll mix some purple in with my cobalt blue. Or quinacridone rose and ultramarine blue make this wonderful purple. And it wouldn't hurt to have a touch of yellow. Just have a little bit of that on the side. So now I've got some colors pre-mixed that I can go in and drop in to my background. And what I usually do when I take pictures of flowers is I set it in both. I'll try it one way and take a few, and then I'll try it the other way. Because sometimes I want all the detail and sometimes I don't. Now this is just setting in a wet background. And I need to work fairly fast because it'll dry pretty quick here in Utah. And then I can drop some colors in. Okay, see, I'm dropping this in and it should be fairly light, washed back. So you don't want a thick value in the background. This is the suggestion. There are other Bluebonnets, but they're diffused, like you see in the photograph. So I will be using the purples and blues in general to suggest that there's more. Yeah, Facebook is optional. I know some of you don't want to be on Facebook, and that's okay. So what I'm doing is having a quarterly open studio where we just get together and you can show me work. I can answer questions. It doesn't have to be what I'm painting. You can totally paint your own, whatever you want to paint. It's more of a supportive, encouraging group where you can follow along my lessons, or you can, take your own path and know that we're here to encourage you and support you. There, now you can see. And I'm leaving a little bit undone at the top. I don't need to put everything in. See, this is drying, so I can wet it down a little bit and bring in my greens. Now, when you sign, I've already got a signature there from yesterday. Tuck it into your painting. Don't put it on the very edge because it'll get cut off if you frame it. So I always suggest that you make your signature part of the painting. If you're using an ink pen in your painting, then go ahead and sign it with an ink pen. But if you've only used a pencil for your drawings and you haven't used a pen, you probably want to draw your signature out with a pencil and then paint it with your brush. So it goes with the painting. If you sign with a pen and there's no pen in your painting, it just looks a little bit off. Now, the only pens that I'll use in one of my regular paintings is possibly a white pen or a gold. I've used gold before. Sometimes those look okay. But really try not to use a black ink pen on it for your signature unless you've used it in the painting. I've limited my colors, and that always makes for a stronger color statement. And just letting this all blend. I think I'm going to splatter on it too. And like I said, if you only do one, that's great. I always like to suggest the easier way. You could even skip the whole background if you want. You don't need to do it all. Sometimes just one simple flower can be so beautiful. Okay, there we go. So now we've got color in the background. I think the shapes are reading well. I'd probably put more into some of these leaves, and I may fiddle around with that later, but see, now I want to have some value change between the foreground and the background. And just by, once it's dry, you can add another layer of color and vary it. You don't have to fill it all in. Some of your petals may have more going on than others. And that starts to give it a little more depth. But I'm also here to answer questions. And I'm going to let that dry for a minute, and then I'll splatter on there, because right here we covered creating different values. Someone asked me what paints I use. I use Daniel Smith. What size pen nib do I use? This is a 0.3. I like, no, 0.03, the 0.5. In the original background you used, there were some orange flowers. Would dropping in spots of orange confuse the painting or enhance it? I think you could do it if you want, but you need to be consistent. So if you put in a little bit on one side and not on the other, it wouldn't make sense. So like the photo behind me, you could have a little bit come in and maybe cross through it and just keep it very subtle. I think that spot of orange would add, a lot of interest. Maybe I wish I would have thought of it.
Okay, I was wondering, do you give feedback on our individual paintings or suggestions?
I do. In Facebook, I try to give feedback on everybody. I go in about 3 days a week and make comments. I'll make a suggestion if there's something I see that I really feel would help your painting, or if you ask specifically for critique, I respond to that. So that is a big part of the program, is our interaction. And then I'll have open studios where you can just come and talk to me too.
Okay, do either of those include paintings that we do on different subjects besides what your demo is?
It can be anything you paint. And take a picture, anybody who wants to share their painting. Okay, 1, hold up your painting. 2, 3, or just smile. Cheese. There we go. That's awesome. And I'm going to splatter. Someone asked me about that. And I think what I'll just do, I do kind of a herbal tea to coffee consistency. Get it on the side of my brush. And then I tap downwards like this on my hand. You always want to kind of test it to see, how much color am I getting? I don't want to go too far. The higher up your splatter, the further apart your spots will be. So if I hold it way up here, they're further apart. The closer I get, the closer the splatters are. I like the splatter in there. It just sort of finishes it off. If you get a splatter that you don't want, just dab at it real quick. Sometimes they land in spots that you really would prefer not, or it gets a little dark. My sleeve broke through that, darn it. So I'll cover it up with more splatter. I like that. And I think this will look nice too when I take off the tape. There, I have a nice clean edge. I'm using white artist tape from Dick Glick. And if you use cheap masking tape, it's going to tear your paper. So always get good masking tape, or even the blue painter's tape is better than cheap masking tape. My watercolor paper is the Fabriano Studio Pad. It's a lot less expensive, and I use it for 90% of my demos. And this is great for almost anything. I even cut it and turn it into sketchbooks. You can get it down at a FedEx or someplace where they can do spirals. The cover is super thick, or the backing, so you can cut that and make that your cover. So Tava, thank you for joining me. If you have any questions, email me anytime at cindybriggsart@gmail.com. And I just appreciate seeing all of your wonderful faces and your great questions. This was really fun. It was fun for me. So thank you for coming along.